Clint Eastwood spent decades breaking hearts. He once viewed marriage as a form of confinement, and his love life became almost as famous as his movies. But despite countless romances, there were a few women he could never forget. Some were great loves, others left wounds that never fully healed. Even after all these years, their impact remains impossible to erase. Now, at 96, Eastwood is reflecting on the women who changed his life forever. To understand Clint Eastwood's complicated love life, you have to start with Maggie Johnson. She was his first wife, the woman who stood beside him before the fame, the scandals, and the many relationships that would later define his personal life. Their story began in 1953. Maggie was a student at UC Berkeley when a mutual friend arranged a blind date with Clint, who had recently left the military and was still searching for his direction in life. When she first saw him, her reaction was simple. Wow. Tall, handsome, and confident, Eastwood immediately caught her attention. The two quickly fell for each other and married in December 1953. But even in those early years, Clint struggled with commitment. Before moving to Hollywood, he had already been involved with other women, including one relationship that resulted in the birth of his first daughter, Lori Murray, who was placed for adoption. Maggie was unaware of this chapter of his life when they exchanged vows. Their marriage was often tested by rumors of infidelity. Friends recalled Maggie confronting Clint about the stories she heard, but he usually brushed off her concerns. The situation became even more complicated in 1959 when Clint began a long-term affair with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis. In 1964, Roxanne gave birth to their daughter Kimber, while Clint was still married to Maggie. Despite the strain, Clint and Maggie built a family together. Their son Kyle was born in 1968, followed by daughter Allison in 1972. Hoping to create a stable life away from Hollywood, they settled in Carmel by the Sea, where Clint built a home and Maggie focused on raising their children. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect family, but behind the scenes, the marriage was becoming increasingly fragile. Everything changed when Sandra Locke entered Clint's life in the mid-1970s. As his relationship with Locke deepened, the distance between Clint and Maggie grew impossible to ignore. By 1979, the marriage had effectively come to an end. Their divorce was finalized in 1984, with reports placing the settlement at around $25 million. Even after the split, Maggie and Clint remained connected through their children. Allison later said that both parents always put family first, and Maggie worked hard to ensure Kyle and Allison maintained a close relationship with their father. The later discovery of Clint's previously unknown children added another layer to the story. Lori eventually reconnected with him as an adult, while Kimber's existence became public years later. Whether Maggie knew the full extent of Clint's double life remains unclear. What is clear is that Maggie endured years of challenges with remarkable grace. She never publicly attacked Clint or turned their private struggles into headlines. Instead, she focused on her children and built a life of her own. While many women came and went throughout Clint Eastwood's life, Maggie Johnson remained the foundation of his early years. If there was one woman Clint Eastwood could never truly leave behind, it was Sandra Locke. Their relationship was far more than a Hollywood romance. It was a complicated story of love, ambition, betrayal, and heartbreak that lasted more than a decade. They first met in 1972 through a mutual friend. At the time, Locke was legally married to her childhood friend Gordon Anderson, though their marriage was platonic because Anderson was gay. She initially auditioned for Eastwood's film Breezy, but lost the role. A few years later, however, Eastwood cast her in The Outlaw Josie Wales, and their personal relationship soon followed. Locke went on to star alongside Eastwood in 6 films, including The Gauntlet, Bronco Billy, Every Which Way But Loose, and Sudden Impact. During those years, she believed they had found something special. Eastwood even told her he had never been faithful to a woman before because he had never truly been in love. Locke trusted him completely and built her life around their relationship. Together, they shared homes in Los Angeles, Carmel, and Northern California. But while their relationship looked solid from the outside, problems were growing behind closed doors. Locke wanted her own career as a director and hoped to establish an identity beyond being Eastwood's partner. She later claimed he discouraged her independence and resisted her working outside his sphere of influence. The relationship slowly deteriorated during the late 1980s. Then came the moment that would define their breakup. In 1989, while Locke was away working on her film Impulse, she returned home to find the locks changed and her belongings removed. A letter from Eastwood's attorneys informed her that she no longer had access to the home she believed they shared. The shock was so overwhelming that she reportedly fainted. What followed was a bitter legal war. Locke filed a palimony lawsuit, accusing Eastwood of humiliating her and seeking compensation for the years they had spent together. The case was eventually settled, with Eastwood providing financial support, a house, and a development deal through Warner Brothers. But Locke later claimed the deal was designed to fail and sued him again for fraud in 1995. That case was also settled privately. The breakup took a heavy toll on her personally and professionally. Her directing career never fully recovered, and she felt increasingly isolated from Hollywood. At the same time, she was battling breast cancer, undergoing a double mastectomy and chemotherapy. One of her deepest hurts, she later said, was that Eastwood never contacted her during her illness. In her memoir, The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly, Locke admitted her greatest regret was staying with Eastwood for so long. Looking back, she believed she should have left years earlier and spared herself much of the pain. When Sandra Locke died in 2018 at age 74, she left her estate to Gordon Anderson, the lifelong friend who had remained by her side through everything. Her story with Eastwood had begun with passion and promise, but ended in lawsuits, bitterness, and heartbreak. Of all the women in Clint Eastwood's life, Sandra Locke may have left the deepest and most lasting mark, not because their love endured, but because its painful ending never truly disappeared. Clint Eastwood's love life has always been complicated, and few relationships illustrate that better than those with Roxanne Tunis and Jocelyn Reeves. Though they entered his life at different times, both women shared something significant. They became mothers to his children while largely staying out of the spotlight. The first chapter began in 1959 on the set of Rawhide. Eastwood was still married to Maggie Johnson when he met stuntwoman and extra Roxanne Tunis. What started as an affair evolved into a long relationship that lasted well over a decade. In 1964, Roxanne gave birth to their daughter, Kimber Eastwood. For years, Kimber's existence remained largely unknown to the public. Eastwood later said he didn't learn about her birth until months afterward. Although he provided support, Roxanne raised Kimber primarily on her own. Unlike many people connected to Hollywood stars, Tunis never sought publicity. She lived quietly, eventually settling in Colorado, where she focused on teaching and meditation. When she passed away in 2023, Kimber revealed that Clint was deeply saddened by her death. Their complicated connection had endured for decades. Kimber later forged her own path in entertainment, working as an actress, producer, and makeup artist while building a life separate from her father's fame. Another important chapter began in the mid-1980s when Eastwood met flight attendant Jocelyn Reeves. Their paths reportedly crossed at the Hog's Breath Inn, Clint's restaurant in Carmel. Unlike his highly publicized relationship with Sandra Locke, his romance with Reeves remained largely private. Together, they had 2 children, Scott Eastwood, born in 1986, and Catherine Eastwood, born in 1988. Reeves chose a quiet life away from Hollywood attention, raising her children largely outside the spotlight. Scott would eventually follow his father into acting, building a successful career through a mix of major studio films and independent projects. Catherine also pursued work in film as an actress and writer. Both grew up carrying the Eastwood name while trying to establish identities of their own. The stories of Roxanne Tunis and Jocelyn Reeves reveal different sides of Clint Eastwood's life. One relationship produced a daughter whose existence remained hidden for years. The other brought two children who would eventually enter Hollywood themselves. Through it all, both women remained remarkably private, choosing quiet lives despite their connections to one of the most famous stars in American cinema. By the late 1980s, Clint Eastwood's personal life was already complicated when actress Frances Fisher entered the picture. The two met while working on Pink Cadillac in 1988, but Fisher later said the real spark happened at a pre-production party. She arrived on roller skates, caught Eastwood's eye, and felt an instant connection. Years later, she described it as love at first sight. As filming continued, the relationship grew. At the time, Eastwood was still dealing with the fallout of other relationships, including Sandra Locke and Jaslyn Reeves, but he and Fisher quietly began seeing each other. After Eastwood's split from Locke became official in 1989, Fisher found herself more deeply involved in his life than she had expected. By the early 1990s, they were appearing together publicly and seemed to have built a serious relationship. In August 1993, they welcomed their daughter, Francesca Ruth Fisher Eastwood. For a time, Eastwood appeared more settled and engaged in family life than many had seen before, but the stability didn't last. Fisher eventually learned that Eastwood's ties to Reeves remained unresolved, and reports of him being involved with other women added further strain. Trust began to erode, and the relationship slowly unraveled. Fisher later reflected that attraction can bring two people together, but lasting love depends on whether they can survive the challenges that follow. By 1995, the relationship was over. Despite the heartbreak, the two avoided a public feud and remained committed to co-parenting their daughter. As Frances Fisher moved on with her life, another woman was preparing to become the next major chapter in Clint Eastwood's complicated romantic history, Dina Ruiz. While Clint Eastwood was still involved with Frances Fisher, another woman quietly entered his life, Dina Ruiz, a young television news anchor from Carmel. Their first meeting came in 1992 when Dina interviewed Eastwood for local station KSBW. The interview was professional, but there was an undeniable spark. Dina later said she was surprised by how down-to-earth he seemed, while Clint admitted they hit it off immediately and even flirted a little. Not long afterward, they met again at a social event in Spanish Bay. What started as a casual encounter quickly turned into something more. By 1995, their relationship was public, and after Eastwood's relationship with Frances Fisher ended, he and Dina openly embraced life as a couple. Things moved quickly. Clint proposed in September 1995, and the couple married the following year in a surprise ceremony arranged by Eastwood at the home of his friend Steve Wynn. Shortly afterward, Dina learned she was pregnant. In December 1996, they welcomed their daughter, Morgan Eastwood. For many years, Clint and Dina appeared happy together. Dina frequently praised her husband, describing him as humble, kind, and surprisingly unpretentious. She once joked that he was like St. Francis of Assisi because he preferred carrying insects outside rather than killing them. Despite their age difference, they seemed to have built a stable and loving marriage. But problems began to emerge around 2012 when Dina launched the reality show Mrs. Eastwood and Company. Eastwood, a famously private man, reportedly disliked the project and felt uncomfortable having his family life turned into entertainment. As tensions grew, the couple drifted apart. By then, they were reportedly living separate lives under the same roof. During this difficult period, Dina reconnected with an old friend, basketball coach Scott Fisher. Although she insisted they were only friends, the situation became increasingly complicated. In an unexpected twist, Scott's ex-wife, Erica Fisher, contacted Eastwood, and the two eventually became romantically involved themselves. By September 2013, Dina filed for legal separation, followed by divorce shortly afterward. Yet despite the painful breakup, she rarely spoke negatively about Eastwood. In interviews, she continued to describe him as a good and caring man, insisting that he had not intentionally hurt her. She once called him the sweetest, most loving, low-key person. Their divorce was finalized, and both moved on. In 2016, Dina married Scott Fisher, bringing her chapter with Eastwood to a close. What began with a simple television interview had led to marriage, a daughter, and nearly 2 decades together. Although the relationship ultimately ended, Dina remained one of the most important women in Clint Eastwood's life and one of the few former partners who continued to speak about him with genuine affection. By the time Clint Eastwood met Christina Sandera, he had already lived through decades of high-profile romances, marriages, and heartbreaks. But this relationship was different. Christina wasn't an actress or a Hollywood insider. She worked as a hostess at Eastwood's Mission Ranch Hotel in Carmel, the historic property he had lovingly restored after purchasing it in 1986. Somewhere between the quiet routines of everyday life and the peaceful atmosphere of Carmel, a connection began to grow. Unlike many of Eastwood's previous relationships, this one stayed largely out of the spotlight. Christina was private, grounded, and uninterested in fame. She fit naturally into Clint's low-key lifestyle, and together they built a relationship centered on companionship rather than headlines. As Eastwood entered his 80s, he seemed to value stability and comfort more than ever before. Their relationship became public in 2015 when Christina accompanied him to the Academy Awards, where American Sniper was nominated for several Oscars. By then, the two had already been seen together around Carmel, often doing ordinary things like grocery shopping, a sign that their relationship was serious rather than a passing romance. Over the next several years, Christina became a constant presence by Eastwood's side. She attended premieres, film screenings, and major events, including the Cannes Film Festival in 2017 and the premiere of The Mule in 2018. Perhaps most notably, she seemed to fit comfortably into Eastwood's large and often complicated family. At public gatherings, she appeared alongside his children, grandchildren, and even his first wife, Maggie Johnson, without any drama or tension. As Clint approached his 90th birthday, life had become much quieter. Family gatherings replaced Hollywood parties, and Christina remained part of that close circle. His son Scott later revealed that birthdays were celebrated simply, usually with family, cake, and little fanfare, exactly the way Clint preferred it. Then tragedy struck. In July 2024, Christina Sandera passed away at the age of 61. Her death was a devastating loss for Eastwood after more than a decade together. Unlike many of the women who had come before her, Christina was never associated with scandal or public drama. Instead, she brought peace, stability, and companionship during the later years of his life. And perhaps that is what made her so unforgettable in Clint Eastwood's story. Which of Clint Eastwood's great loves do you think had the biggest impact on his life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more fascinating stories. See you next time.